Welcome to part 2 of the Chapter 27 overview. This section of the overview will be about China. And here we see two leaders of China. The first is from the Ming. This is Emperor Hongwu. He was emperor from 1368 to 1398 during the height of the Ming Empire. And we'll learn about some of his accomplishments. This is Kangxi. He is from the Qing Empire. The Qing were actually Manchus, but as you can see here, there are some striking similarities between this Chinese emperor and this Manchu emperor, and that is not an accident. The Qing carried on a lot of the policies of the Ming. So here are the overarching concepts from chapter 27. First of all, East Asia, unlike many other areas at this time, such as sub-Saharan Africa and parts of the Americas, who suffered because of increased contacts with Europeans, the East Asian states generally benefited from these contacts during period 4. It would be centuries before China or Japan fell under European domination. So during this time period, this contact is actually positive. As has always been the case for centuries on end, China remained the dominant power in East Asia. And Chinese traditions were restored under the Ming and Qing dynasties after the chaos of the Yuan dynasty, which you probably remember as the Mongols. Lastly, as you've already learned, Japan was unified under the Tokugawa shogunate and began its evolution into becoming a powerful state. So let's learn a little bit about the quest for stability by the Ming. The Ming dynasty was founded in 1368 by that leader we saw on the first page, Hongwu, who restored order and really emphasized Chinese traditions. The symbol for the Ming dynasty, which they also rebuilt, could be the Great Wall. This symbolizes order and control that the Ming dynasty desired. However, it also symbolizes their desire to keep the outside world out, to keep foreigners away, and to maintain their traditions. It also is indicative of this quest for stability without always achieving its goals. Because, of course, you know that the Great Wall did not indeed keep out foreign invaders as it should have. Again, the Great Wall was built on walls that dated back to the Qin. Another great emperor is Yongle. Yongle built the Forbidden City, which is where the rulers lived. They could be completely excluded from the outside world with their wives and concubines and mandarins, which were their advisors, and Confucian scholars. He also financed the massive journeys of exploration under the control of the talented Admiral Zheng He. Later emperors, most notably Wan Li, retreated into isolation and opulence. And also, this is symbolized by the voyages, which were discontinued because of internal problems. These internal problems included things such as famines and invasions by the northern steppe people. Wan Li, in fact, never even left the confines of his palace, instead relying on his mandarins and his Confucian bureaucrats to do all of his ruling for him. As you can imagine, this was not a very successful policy. So here is the basic look of Ming China. As you can see, they're still very, very large. You've also got, just to point out, the Grand Canal here, which was very instrumental in moving food from the south and to the north. Here's the Great Wall and the Forbidden City. Ironically, the Forbidden City is the most visited site in the world today. Internal problems shifted this regime's focus away from the outside world, and the end came in 1644 with the invasions of the Manchus. These were the founders of the Qing dynasty. The Qing viewed their dynasty as pure and forbid the intermarriage of Chinese and Manchu. Chinese men were forced to wear the queue as a form of submission. So if you weren't Manchu, you had to wear this queue so that the Chinese knew that you were indeed loyal to them. And this queue shows up in a lot of European literature as the Europeans visit and trade with China more. There is also other things that the Qing did to promote loyalty and subservience, like besides intermarriage and the queue. If you've ever heard of the kowtow, it's this bow where you bow completely down so that your head is on the floor, knock your head against the ground 3 times, stand back up, and then do that again and again. And the Chinese were supposed to do this when they interacted with a Manchu official. So when people say I'm not going to kowtow to you, that's what they're talking about. They're saying I'm not going to completely submit. China grew even stronger during the Qing era, and the Chinese maintained either direct or indirect control over most of East Asia. And Kangxi is the emperor, as you first saw, ruled from 1661 to 1722. He was the best ruler. Both the Ming and Qing relied on bureaucracies, a huge, massive bureaucratic machine, with the emperor as the son of heaven at the top. These bureaucratic machines emphasized order and tradition through Mandarin advisors and also through Confucian scholars. Civil service examinations ensured the production of scholarly bureaucrats who ran the state. So very much continuation from previous times. The Ming and Qing rulers, in an effort to reestablish the hierarchical and patriarchal social orders, attempted to follow traditional patterns. The changing social and economic world, however, made this a challenge. So they tried to emphasize filial piety and obligation to elders, and these were favorite topics of many of the Confucian moralist writers. And this extended not only to the father and the emperor, but also the clans. Clans numbered in the thousands, and these clans were essential for local order, welfare, and educational assistance. So, for example, if you had a very brilliant son, but you didn't have the ability to afford for that son to go to study as a Confucian civil servant, you might branch off to ask your clan to instead fund this this son's education. Also, similarly, if you were in dire straits and needed a helping hand through either cash or farmland, your clan could provide that for you rather than the government. The relationship between men and women, which had always been male dominated, actually became even more so than the Ming and Qing years, in the Ming and Qing years. And foot binding is the best example of the declining status of women, which we'll learn about in class. Here you can see a woman whose foot is bound, or feet are bound, excuse me, and the goal was to make them very, very small, as you can see here. Although only a small percentage of China's land was suitable for cultivation, a combination of intensive farming and the introduction of new crops led to an increase in the food supply and a huge population explosion, more than doubling. New crops and also intense farms. This would be seen with the fast growing rice, where you could have 2 times as many yields per year. This led to the population explosion, not surprisingly, led to economic and social problems, including famine when population reached beyond the ability to sustain it through food because there was no increase in farmland. And this led to rebellions. China enjoyed a sustainably favorable balance of trade and was active commercially during these years. The massive financial support which Yongle backed Zheng He's discoveries dried up through later rulers as internal problems forced them to use resources elsewhere. Chinese merchants and manufacturers enjoyed much less freedom from governmental supervision than European counterparts did. And they were not allowed to travel externally or outside of China. All of the foreigners had to come to China, which of course they did because they were obsessed with Chinese goods. While the Ming and Qing may have enjoyed internal stabilities, their focus on tradition really stifled innovation and ensured that China fell further behind Europe technologically. Here we can see how far ahead at the beginning of this period China was. This is Zheng He's ship compared to Columbus's ship, one of them. You can see it's much bigger, grandiose, just an insane amount of resources. We'll stop here before we get to Confucianism and culture.